Good afternoon, everyone. I'll talk about careful design and careful design education. Immediately, I can say that I associate straight away careful design with universal design. And I won't read the whole text here, but focus on what is important, in my opinion, and that's self-care in everyday environments. If we talk about care, we think about institutionalized care very often. But before, I would say even beyond institutionalized care, there is self-care in everyday environments. And it's very important that these environments are enabling. And last but not least, they should be attractive, they should be elegant. I'm not talking about aesthetics from a visual perception point of view, I'm talking about elegance. Us in interaction with the built environment or with a chair or whatever. Bachelard said he wrote in 1957 this beautiful phrase in French: the house protects us not only against these storms from outside, but also these storms from inside. That's what's happening in our life growing older. The house has to protect us, or we expect the house to protect us. And that's how we should design. And on the top, there is a nice description of Christopher Alexander, who describes architecture as a structure-preserving transformation. Architecture, it's not about conservation, it's about transformation, always. But structure-preserving. You preserve, and I'll mainly focus on the anthropological structure, the human aspect. It should be human-friendly. Architecture as structure-preserving, respecting and embracing all the people, the diversity of people. I like this cartoon here because in the center you see the Vitruvian man, as we call him. He must be in his 30s, well-trained, but there is a woman standing in front of him and hiding that, so that image of the Vitruvian man is fading out. And then you see a diversity of people surrounding the Vitruvian man and the lady. But I like it as an eye-opener. But simultaneously, on an academic level, it's utterly naive. Because what we see here is a representation of stereotypes. And we are all so different. And most of us are incognito. I'm a person myself with one hand. You didn't notice, probably. I need to stand here to hold my things for me. So that's my condition, that's my context. But usually I'm in I'm incognito. And we had a beautiful workshop this morning with some panelists, people with disabilities, and most of them you could not see what was going on. They explained it to us, and that's very valuable. But my point is, talking as an architect, as an academic, that I can learn a lot from observing people in a wheelchair, people with visual impairments, but I can hardly go beyond that point. So we need other methodologies to extract information. How people feel, the emotional aspect, certainly also very important, and it's not visible. Universalizing disablement policy begins by demystifying the specialness of disability, by seeing it as an infinitely various, fluid, and continuous universal feature of the human condition. So I'll be talking about physical disability here as an aspect of diversity, but in the end, my main goal is to say that universal design, it's something, I'm born with one hand. And I call myself a student of disability. I learn every day about misfits with the built environment because it's not designed for people like me, never. And so I learn a lot. I'm a student of disability in all dimensions, also the emotional, the social dimension of being a person with a physical disability. But beyond that point, I hope the impression you take home with you is that it's not about me. It's not about person A or B or C. It's about the diversity of people, and we are all changing. We change, our conditions in life change, and there's an incredible gap between the demographic aging of population and in an environment that is not age-friendly, was not conceived as age-friendly. There is a gap we have to speed up as planners, urban planners, as architects, product designers, interior architects, and so on and so forth. Human experience of ability and disability is manifest in and through interface with human-made physical objects and environments, obviously. By first identifying special needs that require special attention, we subsequently proceed to generalizing these needs that vary in roughly predictable way over the course of lifespan, our lifespan, your lifespan as well. So here we see we made there is a transition from the medical model up here. Focus is on people with disabilities, and it still is. The medical model is still with us. And they say the impairment is at the center, and the impairment is the problem. Bad luck. And the medical profession is doing whatever it can to solve the problem. And then we shift to the social model and the cultural model, two distinct things. But anyway, away from the medical model, and we say that structures within society might be the problem. I'm not saying they are the problem, they might be the problem. We're working on that. And so the structures within society, we have to change that. And Belgian sociologist De Vis called it a Copernican revolution. It's not the earth is not at the center of the university, it's the sun, so you reverse the system. It's not the person that's the problem, it's the way we organize our society. Recently we have seen also trends in universal design, and I've copied this from, there was a universal design conference in Oslo, very interesting conference, and they collected the main trends there, and they published a book, and that was presented 2 years later in Lund in Sweden, the next universal design conference. The first trend is this from politics and regulation to innovation. And secondly, from accessibility associated with mobility impairments to inclusion, the broader picture. And last but not least, from barriers to sustainability. Universal design is a crucial element of sustainability. It's my personal opinion that by now, universal design has acquired global significance in the social field, in the academic field, and also in the professional field, but there is not yet a methodological framework to structure underlying scientific investigation to support related teaching and design practice. That's my personal point of view, and my research is focusing on this methodological approach, because if we talk about diversity of people, we're like opening a box of Pandora. More and more diversity will come out, and we have to step in pace and keep up and design accordingly. So we have to work on a methodological approach. It's my personal opinion also that each and every functional disability is a spectrum disability. We talk about autism spectrum disorder now. We didn't decades ago. We talked about autism as one thing. No, it's a spectrum disorder. My point of view is that each and every functional limitation, long-term functional limitation, it's a spectrum disorder. There's a difference. I'm a person with one hand. I can tie my shoelaces. I won't demonstrate it here, but I can do it with one hand. And another person with one hand can't do it. But she or he can do other things I can't. So the complexity is incredible. And gradually we open up this diversity, we work with it, we include it in universal design in the built environment, but we have to work on a methodological approach. Basically, it's a structural approach. We are not focusing on a building as an object, as most architects do. We are focusing on a structural approach, the structure of the built environment, position and role of the individual in processes and in structures of building provision, as Ball called it, structures of building provision. It's not only the architect, it's many more people and instances are involved. I'll briefly show you one slide describing two particular views, one proposed by John Hubert in 96-1, and the other one by Christopher Alexander in 64 in their major books as the foundation of their theories. Both emphatically investigate the everyday and the thematic. They search for underlying structures, forms, and mechanisms of control for the total built environment. And this, my interpretation is, of course, now from the perspective of the diversity of people. John Hubert says, or he describes the process leading from, there is a society, there are people, and then architects design, craftsmen, they build, and that's anonymous, what he calls mass housing. And the individual, you and you and you, are excluded from many of these design processes. So where do you have a voice? Where do we have a voice in this process? So this is Habraken's analysis. And what's his answer? He says we have to design support structures and give people the opportunity, he's talking about housing, mass housing, and give people the opportunity to constantly adapt their house to their own needs, to their own wishes. That's his solution to solve this problem. And his first book was called Supports and People in Dutch, the original language. Then it's translated as Supports, an Alternative to Mass Housing. But I've translated the Dutch title because it's about supports and people. Supports are solid structures we design and build, and people come in and they move literally. They move around, they shape the space, they rearrange the space. And recently, about 10 years ago, he has written Palladio's Children. It's a collection of 7 essays, and in his first essay he explains why the title is Palladio's Children. Palladio's role model early on shaped our professional self-image, he says. And in his second essay, he explains the field, what he understands the field is, and leaving the field. The concept of the field as the unity of environmental form and its inhabitant agents. That's the point. You cannot separate buildings from people using the buildings. It's the field. We have to constantly focus on the chemistry of people in built environments and how it affects people, not how it looks like. And as architects, we focus too much on design, on buildings as objects, or on technology, and so on and so forth. Leaving the field is disastrous. And then his third essay out of 7, The Field Unknown. He says, in modern times, the field could no longer remain self-evident, nor could it provide a credible source of inspiration. As a result, alienation from everyday environment turned into troubling isolation. John Hubert. And then the next of my masters, as a young student, I worked with both Hubert for 4 years and with Christopher Alexander for 1 year at UC Berkeley. Because I'm constantly mixing now a story and an academic presentation. The story is about my body and how the way I'm born and my intuition. So as an academic, as a student, I wanted to work with Hubert because I had this intuition that could add to adaptability of the built environment, for me, for us. And years later, after I graduated, I went to UC Berkeley and I worked with Christopher Alexander with a different approach, but very similar, you will see in the end. How does he analyze the built environment? And he shows at the top C1 and F1. I had an emphasis pointer somewhere. C1 and F1. C1 stands for context and F1 for form. And he says in most of the situations, the human being, the individual, is in the middle between context and form and is constantly shifting things. You selected the place here. You're moving your chair to feel comfortable, turning around. It's a design act. It's an act of design. But you are not thinking self-consciously about what you're doing, but constantly we are designing, we are redesigning. You don't have to be a professional for that. Now, when professionals come in, and that's the second scheme, he says, professionals are working on a level of a mental picture. They are not in a wheelchair. Still, they want to design for a person in a wheelchair. They do their best to do that, but it's on a mental level, the mental picture. And what's his suggestion, how to solve the problem? We cannot go back. We are so specialized in our society. We cannot design our own house, build our own house, and so on and so forth. Let it be. Just go one step further, he says, and you make an abstraction. You create a formal picture of the mental picture. And that's his pattern language. He wrote a book published 1977 called The Pattern Language. That's where he documents recurrent patterns of human interaction with built environments for many people, for the majority, but not for people with disabilities. At that time, I'm talking about 64. So if I summarize this now, I would say rephrase it, and it's about changing role of the professional designer. And you might say to the left there's a circle for architects, and architects design. They focus on the built environment, so there is a direct connection. And on the other side of the wall or the gap, there are the users. They come in and they use the buildings. But sometimes the buildings don't fit for the users. So we might say that here at the bottom there is a user needs gap between designers, builders, and on the other hand, the people living there. So, and we need support to improve knowledge transfer. That's one solution. So there is a changing role of the professional designer, but also gradually a changing role of the everyday designer. We have, as architects, as professionals, as academics, we have to leave more and more margins for so-called non-professionals. That's true in the medical sector. That's true in each and every aspect of society. People are better informed. People know to organize. They organize themselves. They connect to other people, peer groups, and so on and so forth. So that's changing. Then user experts. I'm using the metaphor I like. User experts, people with long-term disabilities, they have an incredible knowledge as well about problems they encounter in the physical environment as about solutions. And I see these user experts as minor canaries, so detecting the weaker point in the built environment, they can report the problems, and they can also come up with solutions. And who can better clarify for us what the non-visual, perceptible, multi-sensory qualities and shortcomings of a city space or of a building are than a person who is blind? So if we work together with people, and I did on many occasions teaching architecture, and I'll show a slide in a minute about that. So the mix of people who are blind, teaching students of architecture, how to include the other multi-sensorial qualities, we skip mainly as architects. We are so focused on the visual aspect. This is a crucial slide for me, because this is another metaphor. It's the metaphor of the iceberg. And we know that what we see is only a tiny part of the iceberg. And there is, well, 10%, the laws of physics tell us that 10% is above water and 90% is below water level. But, I mean, this is my estimation. I say, well, let's assume that 30% of the knowledge we have about diversity and how to design for these people, that's explicit knowledge, but only 30%, and 70% it's tacit knowledge. It's underneath the water surface. It's embodied knowledge. People carry this knowledge in their memories, in their bodies. They use it on a daily basis, and as academics, as professionals, we have to extract and to structure that knowledge. So that is the suggestion I have, is the fusion of explicit and tacit knowledge. And I call it universal design patterns, relating to the patterns developed by Christopher Alexander, but now I'll explain to you that we add more and more categories of people to load up the patterns. The explicit knowledge might contribute to prescriptive approaches, laws, regulations, guidelines, very important. But we have tacit knowledge, and that can only contribute to descriptive approaches. That's hidden, that's underneath the water surface, and it's only a minimal of knowledge we can include in rules and regulations. So my point is that we need complementary to a prescriptive approach, we need a descriptive approach to understand what the problems are and what possible solutions are. So here you see the same thing. We move from prescriptive, we can start, and we already did, and we did a good job. And you did a good job in Ireland making the built environment more accessible. You have rules and laws and regulations and guidelines, and that helps a lot. So we're going. But then we can't go beyond a certain point. We can't go further to the utopian goal of universal design, simply relying on rules and regulations. No, much more is involved. And we have to add that dimension of descriptive approach, stretching the fit each and every time. Think about beauty and elegance. That's something you cannot catch in rules and regulations. And it's so crucial for all of us. Non-stigmatizing solutions, beautiful solutions, elegant solutions. So prescriptive rules and regulations for accessibility versus performance-based universal design paradigm. I give one example of a prescriptive approach. It's in Russian. With permission, I've copied from Russian rules and regulations I recently received from an architect in Moscow, and I got his permission to reproduce it here. And it's okay. It contains, for architects, it contains some very valuable information about how high should you put up a sign or information to make it possible for people to access it. But then, in addition to that, there is for me, although I don't understand Russian, there is the suggestion that this is a transparent door, and much more is needed there for safety reasons. So there is this, in these regulations, there is this description of these stripes here, and the dimensions are given and there. But at that point, of course, architects, they will just be blocked, they will feel blocked, because that's something imposed upon the design, and how to relate that to the style of the building you're working in, to the materials you use, and so on and so forth. So prescriptive approach is very good, it's very valuable, and people work on that, very good, but we have to go further. We have to proceed to a complementary descriptive approach. Personally, I've done some research with people with colostomy. That's one of these groups who are among us incognito. They have specific wishes and they focus on toilet spaces. That's where they have an advice for architects how it should be redesigned. And here you have a whole list of things they mentioned to me that should be included in toilets. And there are obvious things we all use, but there are very specific things like clothing hooks, plural. They need more. They take off more clothing. Different height also, but that's for other groups of people. So universal design, not specific design for special needs for colostomy, but that these people come in the built environment. What do they need? They need a shelf. They need warm and cold water, a dustbin, but also man need a dustbin in the toilet, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go in detail, only mention the last point. It's more time needed. 3 minutes, that's for my speech. I was talking about colostomy. I'll skip this one. So we came up with a taxonomy where we talk about users, categories, and the first category is the modal user. That's the important. And activities, and then the built environment aspects, and you have elements. A Belgian-American artist said, if you ask me to draw a pier, that's not so difficult. But if you ask me to draw the background as well, I must know the whole world. And that applies to universal design as well. As architects, we can design buildings, but if you want to include the diversity of people, we have to know the whole world. So briefly, something about education. All my life, I've been teaching architecture to students, architectural education. We benefited from the Toma Revolution adopted by the Council of Europe in 2001, which says on the introduction, or which stresses on the introduction of the principles of universal design into the curricula of all occupations working on the built environment. And we walked up to the Belgian government, we said, this is a European resolution, we have an idea. So we got money to develop a universal design toolkit and to start teaching universal design. And these are, in the end, in our toolkit. These are the components. And you see that universal design patterns as a database collecting all this information are at the center, surrounded by empirical research, simulations, user experts, post-occupancy evaluation, UD education, and last but not least, quality control. And they'll all give feedback in the universal design patterns, not only empirical research. A definition of patterns I will skip. This is how it works. So you, to one side, the users, and this is borrowed from Ed Steinfeld, the enabler, the diverse abilities and disabilities, and part we decompose the built environment, and we see where the strings, they indicate where the points of conflicts are, and we distillate patterns. It's all published, so you can read it later on. This is a model for each and every pattern. We will follow this. So first the title, photograph, and then we will analyze problem definitions, or we will formulate problem definitions for the diversity of people. We will extract it, we will scan, we will work with these groups to extract information. Focusing on staircases in public buildings in this case. This morning in the workshop we have focused on toilet spaces, and we will build up this database. And then we will come up with some architectural technological solutions, not designs, solutions, resolutions. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel each and every time. Some of these patterns are already online, so we're waiting for more budget to further develop the database. And this is how we imagine that it will work in the end. There will be a database with universal design patterns. Everyday users, user experts as we call them, have access to that and give feedback to the research and development team. And also decision makers and designers can have access, or have access to the patterns, can give feedback. So it's very much like Wikipedia. It's this kind of thing we imagine. It's just one proposal. Two more examples. Simulations as one of the components. Here we have built in Hasselt, the place where the small university is located, we have built a demonstration house, 2 dwelling units where you can see aging in place, how that can happen. Here you see the kitchen with adjustable worktop and different mixer taps and so on and so forth. And we do simulations with students there. And people can come in. People, architects, everyone is welcome to see what the possibilities are for the future. And then another component is user experts. I liked in my courses, I'm retired now, so I'm talking about the past, but I like to invite user experts in my lectures, and they would teach the students, not me. And they would give an assignment to the student, not me. So, and I've always had this experience that the students, they were so enthusiastic about their whole body, their whole mind, their emotions, everything being involved in these lectures. Post-occupancy evaluation. We invited blind people to guide people with visual impairments, to guide them around in the new library. So we reversed the thing, and we listened to blind people, how they orientate and navigate in the environment. Senior citizen scenario, I've done it for 7 years in a row. I've sent out my second-year students, and they had to find an older couple in their own house. They had to analyze the house for this older couple and talk to the people and describe in a scenario how they lived, what the misfits were at this moment. And then the students of architecture had to extrapolate that and to see in the future if the house could be adapted. And they had to draw the plans. I don't want to go into details, but some very interesting suggestions came up. And beyond that, it's just the way of teaching, the way they engaged with older people. And they were considered as semi-professionals, although they were only second-year students. So they were proud, and it was a very nice combination. I have many, many examples of that. So if you want to know more, I'll keep an eye on the timing. 1 more minute. I have written a book about this universal design, a methodological approach, published in 2012 in Boston by the Institute for Human-Centered Design, and it's available. So there you will find all the details and about 500 references, so to go deeper in the academic field. But I hope I have by now explained to you what the heart of my approach is and how this is the workshop we had this morning. It was very successful. I enjoyed it, really. But I hope that I will conclude now. I have 3 conclusions under the heading of constructing a universal design culture, first of all. We are architects, or I'm talking from the perspective of architects. We're talking about construction. My suggestion is to, first of all, construct a universal design culture. That's something immaterial. It's something we share among different disciplines, with user experts, with everyone, with society at large. Create universal design culture as a fertile soil for further development of universal design, education, and practice. The common recommendation, I quote from a publication by the World Health Organization, the common recommendation for rethinking the human in a technology and market-driven society and for addressing qualities of accessibility and usability for a widest possible spectrum of users of all ages is education, my emphasis, particularly for urban planners and architects. Quote from a publication by the World Health Organization, 2007. My second conclusion, under the heading of constructing a universal design culture, again, it's about universal design education / co-education. Universal design education entails a return to the real world, to immediacy, and to personal experience away from abstraction. And yesterday and today we have heard a lot about involving the holistic human being, the emotions, the thoughts, and the feelings in an education process and also in professional activities. So the return, I call it, it's kind of counterweight for the level of abstraction. If I see students working with computers, it's marvelous, it's mind-blowing, but it's abstract. And on the other hand, if they work with real people, they enjoy being there with their whole body, with all their feelings. And they can admit, if they see me as a teacher with one hand, I've never asked them, but I can imagine that they have the impression, she or he as a student, I don't have to be perfect myself. I can have some minor things in my body or in my mind. So relax. Let's just share knowledge and information and approach or work for a better world. In addition to that, I believe that the educational setting is perfect. It could be a sensor in society to pick up in a very sensible way what's going on, what's moving in society, and to react and to develop things. It's like a laboratory. That's the second thing. I think educational setting can act as an incubator where you experiment, you design, you build models, simulations, things like that, checked it, so you can do it. That's marvelous. And my last conclusion is more utopian. Universal design or design for all as a utopian construct, deeply rooted in human rights, echoes the motto of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity, and by virtue of its unattainability entails a constant need for regeneration in mentality and in culture, in dynamics and in processes, in ethics and in values. Thank you.